Moses spoke to the children of Israel on the plains of Moab across the Jordan from the land that God had promised them through Abraham about what they were to do once they received the land. Deuteronomy 26, 1-3. And it shall be when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and you possess it and dwell in it, that you shall take some of the first of all the produce of the ground which you shall bring from your land that the Lord your God is giving you, and put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. And you shall go to the one who is priest in those days, and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the country which the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. Each year they were to bring their firstfruits offerings to the Lord and declare that they had received the inheritance of the land that God promised to give them. This was actually just the beginning of what they were to declare. What was the purpose of this yearly declaration? What else were they to specifically do when they entered the land? And how does this all point to Yeshua? And what does it mean for our lives today? I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is Shadows of the Messiah. This instruction to the children of Israel comes in 3 parts. The first part is that they were to bring the firstfruits of the land. The firstfruits of the land were simply an acknowledgement that all the blessings they had received, including the land as well as the fruit from the land, were from God. Deuteronomy 26, verses 9-10. He has brought us to this place and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the firstfruits of the land, which you, O Lord, have given me. Then you shall set it before the Lord your God, and worship before the Lord your God. This was an occasion to worship the God who loved them and gave them good gifts. Second, they were to take their offerings to the place where God would place his name. In the teaching on the Torah portion Reah, we showed that ultimately that place was destined to be Jerusalem. But we shall see the first place that God placed his name in the promised land was on Mount Ebal, above the city of Shechem, across from Mount Gerizim. The third thing that they were to do was to make this declaration, which begins with the proclamation that the land was a gift from God. The declaration continues by reciting how God heard their voice when they were being afflicted and brought them out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Deuteronomy 26, verses 7-8. Then we cried out to the Lord God our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and looked on our affliction and our labor and our oppression. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great terror, and with signs and wonders. But the children of Israel weren't just to sit back and revel in all the things that God gave them, keeping the material blessings to themselves. Long before the phrase, pay it forward, became popular, God told his people to bless others as they had been blessed. Look at Deuteronomy 26, verses 11-12. So you shall rejoice in every good thing which the Lord your God has given to you and to your house, you and the Levite and the stranger who is among you, when you have finished laying aside all the tithe of your increase in the 3rd year, the year of tithing, and have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat within your gates and be filled. In fact, they couldn't complete their declaration before God until they had blessed the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Look at Deuteronomy 26, verse 13. Then you shall say before the Lord your God, I have removed the holy tithe from my house, and also have given them to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all your commandments, which you have commanded me. I have not transgressed your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. They were to provide for the Levite because God set the Levite aside for service to him, and they did not receive an inheritance in the land. This was not a new instruction. Moses had already told them that taking care of the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow was a necessary condition for continuing to receive God's blessing. Look at Deuteronomy 14, verses 28 and 29. At the end of every 3rd year you shall bring out the tithe of your produce of that year, and store it up within your gates. And the Levite, because he has no portion nor inheritance with you, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, who are within your gates, may come and eat and be satisfied, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. Yeshua backs up this request from God to take care of the stranger and the fatherless and the widow. He told his disciples that when the Son of Man came, the reward he handed out would be based on how each one treated those who were in need. Look at Matthew 25, verses 34 through 36. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. James, the brother of Yeshua, tells us that pure religion is lived out by taking care of the fatherless and the widow, as well as keeping oneself separate from the world. James 1, verse 27. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit the orphans and the widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Now, going back to Moses and the declaration the children of Israel were to make before God and each other, it concludes with asking God to continue to bless them. Deuteronomy 26, verse 15. Look down from your holy habitation, from heaven, and bless your people Israel and the land which you have given us, just as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. This declaration was actually to be done 3 times a year at each of the 3 harvest times. Deuteronomy 16, verses 16 through 17. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. The observance of these feasts and the firstfruits offerings that were to accompany them was so important that God said he would protect their borders when they presented themselves before God at the place where he placed his name. Exodus 34, verse 24. For I will cast out the nations before you, and enlarge your borders. Neither will any man covet your land when you go up to appear before the Lord your God 3 times in the year. Now let's turn back to the first place where God placed his name in the land of Israel. Deuteronomy 27, verses 4 through 5. Therefore it shall be, when you have crossed over the Jordan, that on Mount Ebal you shall set up these stones, which I command you today, and you shall whitewash them with lime. And there you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. You shall not use an iron tool on them. God referred to this place when he first spoke the 10 words to the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. Exodus 20, verses 24 through 25. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you, and I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it. This was the first place they were to set up an altar to God in the Promised Land. This altar was a different altar than the bronze altar built specifically for use in the tabernacle of God. The bronze altar was built of acacia wood and coated with bronze, not stone. It was the work of gifted artisans, commissioned by God to build all the articles of the tabernacle. The altar of stone was made of raw stone that had not been worked by the hand of any man. So what was the purpose of this special altar that God required them to build when they came into the land? First, there was only to be one altar built, and it was to be built where God placed His name. They were not to bring their offerings anywhere except to the one place where God placed His name. Deuteronomy 12:13 through 14. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, but in the place which the Lord chooses. In one of your tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. So this altar of God set up on Mount Ebal was for a special event. The event was the renewing of the covenant that God had made with the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. Moses instructed the people on what would happen on that day. Look at Deuteronomy 27:9 through 10. Then Moses and the priests, the Levites, spoke to all Israel, saying, Take heed and listen, O Israel. This day you have become the people of the Lord your God. Therefore you shall obey the voice of the Lord your God, and observe His commandments and His statutes, which I command you today. The altar used to establish the covenant at Mount Sinai was also made of stone, where the children of Israel brought their burnt offerings and their peace offerings. Look at Exodus 24, verses 3 through 5. So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which the Lord has said we will do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. And he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the tribes of Israel. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Moses completed the ceremony at Mount Sinai by taking the blood of the oxen and sprinkling half on the altar and half on the people. The people declared that they would do all that the Lord commanded them to do. The events on Mount Ebal recreated this event. The children of Israel didn't have God appearing in smoke and His voice echoing in the thunderings and lightnings as they did on Mount Sinai, so God instructed them to be His voice instead. Half of the people were to stand on Mount Gerizim and shout out all the blessings God would pour out on those who kept the covenant with Him, and the other half were to stand on Mount Ebal and shout out all the curses that would come on Israel if they broke the commandments. Look at Deuteronomy 27:11 through 13. And Moses commanded the people on the same day, saying, These shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people when you have crossed over the Jordan: Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And these shall stand on Mount Ebal to curse Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. At this ceremony within the Promised Land, God would establish Israel as His nation. Deuteronomy 28, verses 9 through 10. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to Himself, just as He had sworn to you. If you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in His ways, then all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. Joshua described this covenant ceremony taking place in Joshua chapter 8, just as Moses described. But why did God specify using unhewn stone, stating that using a tool on the stone of the altar would profane the altar? This covenant that God made with the children of Israel was not a covenant made between equal parties. God alone made this covenant possible, and this covenant goes back to Abraham. When God made the covenant with Abraham, God alone walked between the parts of the covenant sacrifice. After Abraham prepared the sacrifice by cutting them into two, he laid the pieces, the parts, across from each other, and God completed the ceremony. Look at Genesis 15, 17 through 18. And it came to pass, when the sun went down, and it was dark, that, behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. On the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. God stated his promise to give the land to Abraham's descendants. Then, at Mount Sinai, God stated his intention to fulfill his promise to Abraham by giving the children of Israel the promised land. Once again, this was not based on anything the children of Israel had done, as the children of Israel declared that they brought their firstfruits offerings to God. It was God who brought them out of Egypt and brought them into the land. It was not by their own power and might. So the altar also had to be a work of God. It was not the work of man, so that man would be lifted up. It was completely the work of God that he should be lifted up. So also, the new covenant is completely the work of God. It is God alone who writes the words of the Torah on the hearts of the house of Israel and Judah that he brings into the covenant. It is by the sacrifice and blood of Yeshua, that the divine Son of God, who brings us into the covenant. Look at Luke 22, verses 19 through 20. And he took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Likewise, he also took the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. This altar of unhewn stone represents Yeshua himself. Like the altar, Yeshua was not the product of any man, nor was he beautiful in man's eyes. Look at Isaiah 53, verse 2. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had a vision in which an unhewn stone destroyed the image of a man. Daniel interpreted this vision to mean that the unhewn stone was the kingdom of Messiah, which destroyed the kingdoms of men. This altar of unhewn stone then represents the kingdom of Messiah and the everlasting covenant between man and God. It is totally the accomplishment of God. The children of Israel had the choice on that day to enter into the covenant with God. And Moses tells them that today they enter into the covenant. Deuteronomy 26, verses 16 through 17. This day the Lord your God commands you to observe these statutes and judgments. Therefore you shall be careful to observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. Today you have proclaimed the Lord to be your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his commandments, and his judgments, and that you will obey his voice. At the base of Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, Joshua presented the children of Israel with the choice of choosing that day whom they would serve. We also have the choice today of whom we will serve. When we enter into the promised land of the kingdom of Messiah, let us do so by bringing the first fruits of the land and declaring that this day God has brought us out of the Egypt of our slavery to sin and the flesh and brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey. Let us do so today by paying it forward and sharing both the material blessings and the blessings of salvation with the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Thanks for watching today. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this has been Shadows of the Messiah. Shalom, and be blessed.